What the heck is up, everybody? My mic was muted. How is it going? How is everybody doing today? Wolf Communist says, what's up? Exodus says, Chad. We're all Chads in the chat, baby. American Communist Party, the Communist Party of Chads, the Communist Party of people who are going to change this damn country, the Communist Party of young people who looked at the country and saw no future for themselves and decided we're going to take up the mantle of communism because if it doesn't start now, then, or because someone's got to start it. Somebody's got to do it, right? Somebody's got to bring back communism in this country. For the last 30 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union, we've been told that communism is dead. We've reached the end of history. All you get is the existing neoliberal system. I don't care if you can't pay your rent. I don't care if you can't find a job. I don't care if you're drowning in student debt or medical debt or the other millions of kinds of debt that the richest people in the country are trapping us in. We don't care. Communism doesn't work. It failed. Accept neoliberalism. Shut the hell up. There's not even a communist party in this country. What the hell are you going to do? That's what they've been telling us for the last 30 years. But now there is a communist party. And no, it's not as big as the Democratic Party. It's not as powerful as the Democratic Party. It's not as big and powerful as the Republican Party. But the difference between our party and those parties is we have the truth on our side. Those parties must. It is a necessity for them to lie to you. 17% of people don't think, only 17% of Americans think Congress is doing a good job. A similar tiny percentage of people trust the media. Yet the same system is in power. The same people are in power. So everybody knows that this system is failing. So the ruling class, the people in power, it is a necessity for them to lie to you and tell you that there can be no better system, that this is the best that we can do. But for us, we have the truth on our side. We're going to people and telling them that we can have a better system. That we can have a system that's run by the workers, but we got to get organized and we have to fight for it first. Right? And the sooner that fight starts, the better. Right? We could have waited another 2 decades to form a real communist party in this country. But it's got to start sometime. It's got to start sometime before it can grow into a party that can actually represent the American working class and start to fight for the American working class. Not only for the eventual working class revolution, but also for reforms in the short term. But we'll get into all of that and react to some stuff after we play our brand new intro from Comrade Jesus Motorcycle. Shout out to him for this. Let me know what you think of it.
High Sheriff Hazard is a hard man to be. High Sheriff is his only plan. He digs through pockets, takes what he can, for he's High Sheriff Hazard. He caught me one evening and here's what he said. You look like a Russian, you look like a red. We threw the old bastard right out on his ear. Farewell to High Sheriff Hazard.
All right. I'm a big fan of that intro. I don't know about you. I also just spilled my bubbler. This is an energy drink that I just recently learned they only have in the Midwest. Someone said that. I feel like that isn't true, but I just gave myself a heart attack, almost spilled it on my computer, which is my source of income and a huge source of content for Midwestern Mark. So I'm glad that I did not do that. But anyways, what does everyone think? Really, really great. I like it. Good. Fire. It's a heartfelt and artistic piece. It reminds me of the True Detective opening. Very cool. I like that. We wanted it to be pretty modern. You know what I mean? We want to capture the history of communism. We want to capture the old school, the history of class struggle, especially in this country. You know, figures like MLK, Du Bois, the Union soldiers, the Revolutionary War against the British, but and of course the communists in this country, and internationally. But we also wanted to be somewhat modern, you know, almost like a True Detective opening. So I effing love this. Awesome. Terry Murdoch says, incredible intro. Thank you, Terry. Thank you to a great ACP member, and I believe the head of his club or his ACP chapter. So the boys looking hard AF, sick visuals, amazing job, Jesus. Very cool. Love it. Awesome. Looks like everybody is enjoying the new intro. Du Bois' art was sick. Thank you. Everyone except Robbie Burns. Robbie Burns says not good. Sorry, Robbie. Everyone else seems to like it though. British Columbia chapter exec. Yeah, let's go. Based. Question. ACP is not Jackson, not Haas. Can we get some official ruling on the ACP position on gender and sexual minorities? Yeah, the ACP position on these issues, like you said, is not, you know, something that Haas or Jackson said 4 years ago on Twitter or on the Fresh and Fit podcast or something. The position is just tolerance, right? It's just tolerance. Just let people do what they want. Now, do we think that wokeism and this hyper focus on sex, gender, identity, race, identity politics, religion is being pushed from the top down? Is that being pushed by neoliberal institutions like non-governmental organizations and think tanks to get the people to support imperialism or to infiltrate left-wing movements and get them to hyper-focus on identity politics rather than class struggle and anti-imperialism? Absolutely. Yes, we recognize that. We criticize that. The CIA is publishing commercials where they brag about their non-binary, black, gay, dealing with anxiety and mental health issues CIA agents, right? So if we don't acknowledge that these, you know, progressive movements or that progressive woke politics are being co-opted by the ruling class in order to justify imperialism, then our analysis is lacking, right? Because that is the modern face of imperialism. It's no longer, you know, this explicitly like white supremacist era of colonialism and imperialism that saw race science produced by the intellectuals of the day, right? Like when Great Britain was colonizing Africa, the ideology or the sort of intellectual justification they gave for that was race science. Well, we Europeans, we whites are just superior. So we're actually bringing development and civilization to the global south, you know, and there's still some of that today. But in many ways, imperialism has had to change its rhetoric because people realize that's bullshit. People realize, no, you know, it's not the color of the skin of the people in Africa that makes them poorer than Western nations. It's the fact that we've robbed them and enslaved them and murdered them and overthrown their governments, like what NATO did to Gaddafi every time they try and fight back. So more and more people have opened their eyes to this. So what has the empire done? They've started pushing things like Samantha Power's book in the early 2000s called A Problem from Hell, which was basically arguing that the U.S. needs to get more militarily involved overseas to prevent genocides from happening, to protect, LGBTQ rights and U.S. cultural values around the world. So this is more aimed at co-opting people who aren't racist, right? And after the civil rights movement, which we consider to be the third revolution in American history, the American people are much racist, or much less racist, not more racist. They're much less racist after the civil rights movement 70 years later. So the race science ideology has been set aside for this woke ideology, this idea that if you don't support regime change in Iran, then you're sexist because you support, all women being in burqas, and Iran's not allowed to have their own culture where women wear burqas because we in the West are, we have the superior culture, so we're going to militarily enforce it upon them. And they use that to weaponize people's morality, right? They say you're immoral if you don't support imperialism and if you don't support colonialism. So we have to recognize that this is the modern face of imperialism. But at the same time, we shouldn't be harassing people for their, gender and sexual identity. The American people have proven that they support things like gay marriage, right? That they don't care about two men getting married. So why would we fight against what the American people have said they're tolerant of already? Right. And there could be criticism of how like gender ideology is being pushed in schools, right? How gender ideology is being pushed on impressionable kids who can be taught anything, right? That's a real question. But once you're an adult, why should we care what you want to do? Why should we care what you want to do in terms of your gender and sexuality? Like, yeah, I put it that way. Like, I have criticisms of the way that gender ideology is being pushed in elementary schools, but I'll still call somebody by whatever pronouns they want just out of respect and tolerance, right? Because I don't really care, because I want to get to know you as a person. I don't really care about these outward identity labels so much. So if you want me to call you whatever pronouns, I'm happy to do that. I don't give a shit. But, be careful of what you're telling 7-year-olds, right? Be careful about telling young, impressionable, developing kids who are hitting puberty and dealing with lots of trauma and crazy stuff in their lives. Be careful of telling them that the solution to all their problems is, chemicals or changing their gender. Maybe that is what they want to do eventually. Maybe that is the route that they want to go. But it's scary because kids will believe anything, right? You can tell a kid pretty much anything and they'll believe it. So, yeah. But I mean, even that, I don't know that the party will take a staunch position on things like that. It'll mostly just be a position of tolerance. But at the same time, you have to be tolerant of other people's views, right? You have to be tolerant of people who aren't up to date and hip on all of the PC language and, the socially progressive positions. You have to be tolerant of other people's social views. Even if you consider your social views to be the most progressive and the most left and the most forward thinking, you still have to be tolerant of the views of others, and you have to be able to have conversations about these social issues without it leading to a split and a meltdown, right? And there's a difference between somebody being misogynistic, literally, and discriminating against members of the party based on their race, sex, identity, which is absolutely banned within the party. You cannot do that. You cannot discriminate against other people based off their identity. So that will be punished and cracked down upon. But, if you have a different position on, I don't know, if you have a slightly different position on abortion than someone else, right? This needs to be something that we can talk through, not something that leads to a split in the party. Because that's been a big problem of communist parties in the past, right? They just, especially in America, they split and they split and they split, especially Trots. And the split is always, we're the real party. We're the true party. We're the real revolutionary communist party because we have the truest theory. Meanwhile, it's like 10 guys. And the party that they split from is like 25 guys. And, they're talking about being the true revolutionary party. And this is where democratic centralism is such an important principle. Right? This is where we have freedom of debate within the party, freedom of discussion within the party. We can bring things up and talk about them. But then once the party decides upon something, once the party votes upon something, we have unity of action. So if I have a minor disagreement with you, we debate it, the party discusses it, bring it up for a vote, decide what the party's position is, and I just accept that that's the party's position. I don't say, oh, this party is garbage and trash and I'm leaving because of this minor thing. Right? It's different. Like there were a bunch of splits in Lenin's era when a bunch of communist parties decided to support World War I. Right? That's different because then you're not communist anymore. Now you're supporting imperialism and you're supporting capitalism. Like if a communist party in the US started supporting Israel, right, that would be different. But when it comes to these social issues, which have been used as political footballs by the Democrats and Republicans for the last however many decades, over a century now, they've used social issues as a political football to keep people fighting, keep people polarized, and keep people coming to the ballot box. We need to be able to discuss these issues as communists without it leading to a split, without it leading to all of us hating each other. I haven't been reading the chat. Are people mad? Are they being told that they should change gender? Are they being told that trans people exist? I mean, I think it depends on where you go, right? I think it depends on where you go and the classroom that you're in. And I do think it's good for people to learn tolerance and for people to learn that other kinds of folks exist. But yeah, I did go into an elementary school the other day and it was, filled with very woke stickers and all sorts of woke messaging and it very much so looked like gender ideology was being pushed on the kids more so than they were just, the kids were being taught that different kinds of people exist. And that there are a lot of complaints from parents now that that's going on too. And I don't think those complaints are illegitimate, right? I think it makes sense that parents are concerned about what their children are being taught when they go to school, because under our system, right, the parents go to work and they leave the kids at the school. That's why the public school system was invented. This is why Adam Smith, who's considered one of the fathers of capitalism, was in favor of a public school system, because he said capitalism, there's things that capitalism can't do, such as educating the youth, and we need a place for the youth to go while their parents are working. So that's why it's called the industrial school system, because it comes about with the Industrial Revolution, as parents need a place to send their kids. And what should we, as a society, as a capitalist society, what should we do while the parents are at work with the kids? Well, we should train the kids up so they can be good workers one day, or so they can inherit the system. So, it makes a lot of sense for working class parents to be worried about what their kids are being taught when they're in this industrial school system, including what they're being taught about religion, race, gender. So I'm not saying that the party needs to take a strong opinion or position on these things besides tolerance, like I said, but it also shouldn't be dismissive, right? It shouldn't be dismissive, or it shouldn't call parents bigots for being concerned about what their kids are being taught in elementary school. Right? We should have understanding about these issues and understand that there's gray area here, right? There's difference between somebody who thinks abortion should be legal all the way up until 9 months versus somebody who thinks that abortion should be legal up until 6 to 8 weeks, right? There's a gray area there. And as communists, as dialecticians, as dialectical materialists, we need to understand and see that gray area, understand where the area for debate is. Not just say, you're evil you're evil anti-woman person if you're, if you're against, or what they do with that abortion issue, what the Democrats and Republicans do is they say you're either pro-life or pro-choice, two extremes, right? And then fight over it. If you're pro-choice, then you are anti-life, right? You want babies to die. And if you're pro-life, then you're anti-woman. You hate women and you want women to suffer. And then you fight. And then when the election comes up, you have to vote for us. We're pro-life. You have to vote for us. We're pro-choice. And there's never any discussion about, well, maybe we should allow abortions up to a certain point. And then at a certain point, we decide, okay, that's a baby. Right? Maybe we vote on that. Or maybe, because women are the ones who carry the baby, maybe that's a women's issue and we have women vote on it. Or maybe because there are regional differences in what people think about abortion, maybe we have them vote based on region, or maybe women's vote counts for 80% and a man's vote only counts for 20%. I don't know. But these nuanced discussions about social issues like abortion, cultural issues, are never had. It's always you're pro-life, you're pro-choice, fight. This means you're either a Democrat or you're a Republican, right? You're now mortal enemies with the other side because of your position on this issue. So all I'm saying is that as communists, we need to be tolerant, not just tolerant of people's identity, but tolerant of people's views on these social and cultural issues. And we need to see where there's gray area, and we need to understand how the ruling class has used these things as a political football. Now, this is just me rambling. This is me just talking, right? The ACP's position is, as of now, is just tolerance, period. I'm more so just giving my opinion on these things. It only seems like the wokies got what they wanted. Endless discussion about what gender ideology is. This is only derailing class struggle. Who the F cares about what's in your pants or who you like? Yeah, 100% agree with the last sentence. Like, who cares, right? Especially if you're an adult, and as long as whatever you're doing is consensual, who gives a shit? And yes, this is what they want, an endless discussion about gender and stuff. And I think it's okay to talk about gender ideology. I think it's okay to have these questions or discuss these questions on a theoretical level. But it always gets these issues so easily become personal, right? And people feel like you're attacking your identity or the identity of people they love when we discuss these things. And yeah, I think it's good to keep the discussions based on, keep them tolerant, right? And keep them based not on, this individual's bad, that individual's good, this individual's evil, blah, blah, blah. The way that the Republicans talk about wokeism. But instead make them nuanced and talk about, the theoretical basis of these things. LOL, the LGBTQ is getting a lot of outside population pissed. They are sick of the LGBTQ culture losing steam. Very true. Yeah, there's definitely a backlash. It's interesting too, because there was all this push for, the wokeism in the follow, or we could talk about BLM for hours, right? And how a lot of the main leaders of BLM were like really smart people, or the early leaders of BLM were smart people who were pushing this movie called The 13th, which explains how the policing system, the racist and classist policing system, is rooted in the prison industrial complex, and how they're making money off of the war on drugs and keeping the prisons filled with bodies. It's a fantastic movie. And BLM was pushing that at first. And then, of course, a lot of those leaders got killed. They got disappeared, or they mysteriously committed suicide, and they were replaced with a bunch of neoliberals. But anyways, at this time, this is when like corporations start going to Pride, right? And we have the Democrats like kneeling on the ground in kente cloth and stuff. This is when really corporations start co-opting the progressive movements on the ground for their own interests, when they start co-opting the LGBTQ movement, as well as movements against racism and police brutality like BLM. And the NFL plasters itself with BLM stickers, right? We all understand the era of woke capitalist imperialism that we're living in. And of course, that was the capitalist system trying to maintain itself when there were all these massive uprisings during BLM. And it started before then, but that was sort of a tipping point. But anyways, then there was a backlash to that. There was a backlash against, the radical feminism and the progressivism and the hyper liberalism and the, plastering LGBTQ and progressive stickers all over everything as if that's, going to bring about systemic change. There was a backlash to that. And you have all these right-wing goofballs like Andrew Tate, who are saying, the problem. Hey, Marius, how's it going? Sorry, I just saw Marius in here. We have all these right-wing goofballs like Andrew Tate who come in and say the problem is these feminists, the problem is wokeism, the problem is the left, full stop. And now there's a backlash against that too. Like people who used to watch the freaking Joe Rogan Experience, who are saying all that Joe Rogan talks about now is wokeism. All that Joe Rogan talks about is the culture war and how he's being censored and what liberals are doing. And we wish he would go back to talking about, I don't know, DMT and elk and stuff. So there's been this big wokeism push, then a backlash against it, then a backlash against that. But meanwhile, what gets left behind always? Class analysis, right? But yeah, there are a lot of leftists who are now mad that these cultural issues are losing steam. And it's like, well, you got to bring people systemic change, right? You got to bring people systemic change if you want to get them on board with what you're pushing, right? You can't just call people racist as individuals and, plaster stickers all over everything and say that the country's better now and expect people to accept that when they're drowning in debt and living paycheck to paycheck and watching all of our money be funneled into a genocide. Now I want an elk burger. Dude, elk burger, that sounds amazing. I got a bison burger the other day for the first time. It's so good. The backlash is very much astroturfed. It all is. All this shit is, dude. All this shit is astroturfed. The wokes, the anti-wokes, all that stuff's astroturfed. They want right-wingers who are Ben Shapiro, and they want left-wingers who are Vaush. That is what the ruling class wants, and that is what they astroturf. They want Vaush versus Ben Shapiro. Because when it comes to imperialism, when it comes to capitalism, Vaush and Ben Shapiro are in agreement. Right? Vaush supports every U.S. intervention overseas. He supports what the U.S. is doing. He condemns every U.S. enemy state, same way that Ben Shapiro does. Anytime there's a real uprising against capitalism here in the U.S. or anywhere around the world, he condemns it as authoritarian and justifies the U.S. military getting involved to crush it or the police getting involved to crush it. But then he focuses on culture war issues, right? He's always talking about bathrooms and gender ideology and J.K. Rowling and all this different distraction stuff. And Ben Shapiro, it's the same thing. He's the right-wing culture warrior. The left is gone crazy. Look at this Little Mermaid movie. Ariel is black now. How will society ever recover? This is the reason that 60% of our country has healthcare debt because, they have a black Little Mermaid. Whatever shall we do about this? Meanwhile, make sure that you support giving Israel $3 billion and this endless proxy war with Ukraine, because that's what a good a fiscal conservative would want. Spending billions of dollars on endless wars abroad. That is what the ruling class wants. They want Vaush versus Ben Shapiro. They want the left to be Vaush's and they want the right to be Ben Shapiro's. And if they can't have that, they'll push people to be Nick Fuentes. All astroturfy. Yup. Yeah, and if you think about it, I've been saying this forever. If you think about astroturfing and how it actually works with these social media apps that we all utilize, right? I mean, YouTube's a little different because you can consume long-form content. Like you've all been listening to me for 30 minutes now. But it's a little different with apps like TikTok or Twitter where you're consuming short-form content. But I mean, this works with YouTube too. But the ruling class, we'll take the CIA, for example, which is just one arm of the ruling class. They don't necessarily need to create fake accounts in order to push a certain narrative, right? Like if they want to push for regime change in Venezuela, they do not necessarily need to create a bunch of fake accounts that say we need regime change in Venezuela. They have done that. They did that with the SOS Cuba color revolution effort a few years ago, which was the first time that our TikTok account got banned when we came out against that, by the way. They created thousands of fake accounts, but they don't necessarily need to do that. All they need to do is like tweets or posts that are pushing the narrative that they want. So they need to take people who are real people, real life people, whether they be left, right, or independent, who are tweeting in favor of regime change in Venezuela. And then all the CIA has to do is use bots to like and retweet those posts. And it's psychological manipulation. It's like some MK Ultra shit, if you think about it, because what happens when somebody likes your tweet? You get a dopamine hit. You get feel goods. You get chemicals that make you feel good. Oh, I got social validation from my friend in this era of pro-felicity where we all communicate and get social validation through social media. So if you get social validation for tweeting in favor of regime change in Venezuela, what does that encourage you to do? It encourages you to make more tweets in favor of regime change in Venezuela. So you can get that sweet, sweet dopamine. So you can get those sweet chemicals, that hit of the feel-good chemicals that you need, that you become addicted to once you keep tweeting about this stuff. Once you tweet about how evil Midwestern Marx and the ACP is and you get 100 likes, holy shit, I better keep going. Right? So it's almost like chemical warfare that they do through the algorithm, algorithmic chemical warfare. But it makes it so that they don't even need to make bots because they can create their own bots. And this is always what they've done, you guys. Oh, and thank you so much, El Jimenez, for the $5 super chat. Thank you so much. We are a people's funded institute. Every dollar that we make and put towards organizing and educating in the ACP and all that comes from you, the people. So thank you so much for that. Algorithm feed support, opaque manipulation by design. Absolutely. Because what this is not new. The CIA has always wanted, like, this was the whole goal of MK Ultra, was to get people to do their dirty work for them, right? They want to be as hands off as possible. The less fingerprint that the CIA can leave on a regime change effort or on some project, the better. They always want to get others to do their dirty work. And what they did with these pseudo-Marxist Frankfurt School thinkers, or these, Western Marxists, these people who said, abandon class struggle, abandon the proletariat. All we need to focus on now is identity politics. You rah rah. These are the Marxists that you'll study if you study Marxism in school. If you get a degree in philosophy, you'll study Western Marxists, and they all have ties to the CIA. But was the CIA funding them directly? Was the CIA coming up to Herbert Marcuse, sending an agent to Herbert Marcuse and saying, hey, if you call yourself a Marxist, but focus your philosophy on identity politics rather than class struggle, and condemn every existing socialist project in human history, we'll give you some money. We, the CIA, will pay you, Herbert Marcuse. No, that's not what happened. It wasn't a CIA agent who just went up and facilitated it. What they did was they funded these journals. They funded magazines. They funded outlets that were publishing academics like Marcuse. And they said, only publish academics who are pushing this narrative that we want. Only publish academics who are calling themselves Marxists, but are trying to prioritize identity politics over class struggle. And then we'll give you all this money through the Ford Foundation, right? Through a corporate NGO with connections to the CIA, but not the CIA directly. Although these magazines and journals did receive direct funds from the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was explicitly a CIA project. But anyways, they tried to remain as uninvolved as possible. And these thinkers, a lot of them died believing that they were truly Marxists, right? They died believing that they were truly communists when in fact they had been working for the CIA the whole time, right? Because the CIA didn't fund them directly. They created for the conditions of they created the conditions for the possibility of those kind of thinkers to exist. They created academic journals that would turn you into an intellectual celebrity if you pushed the CIA line. So they weren't, funding journalists, or they were funding journalists indirectly, right? But these journalists didn't know that they were CIA agents. They were just propping up the journals that these journalists were publishing in, and then making sure those journals edited out anything that the CIA didn't want. right? So it's the same thing with social media. They'll prop up other people who say the kind of shit that they want, but they don't necessarily, there probably aren't that many like giant Twitter accounts right now that are literal CIA agents pretending not to be. It's probably just people who the CIA identified as useful and use their resources to boost. So I think that's important to understand in the era of profilicity and social media. And this is why it's so important to be boosting each other, right? I've seen people roast Midwestern Marx and Infrared because we use our Discord to boost certain kinds of content, or we manipulate algorithms in order to get our content out there. It's like, why would we not? Why would we not? The ruling class is doing it. Do you understand what class struggle means? Do you understand that we are in a class war, in a battle, in a fight? In a fight, you need to use tactics. You need to think about what you're doing, analyze it, discuss it, and try to optimize it so that you can succeed, so that you can be as efficient as possible. Like, you have all these people saying, I'm not going to get a blue check mark on Twitter because I don't want to give money to Elon Musk because it's stupid and I wish it was still called Twitter instead of X. Like, okay, cool. But now all your content is going to get buried in the algorithm because X boosts people who have the blue check mark. Right? So you're putting moral purity above getting information out there, above education, and which can help to advance the class struggle. So it's this thing on the left where we never think about strategy and tactics. There's so many leftists who don't think it's possible to win, right? They think leftism is correct because capitalism and imperialism are so awful, but they don't think it's actually possible for us to win. They think we're stuck in neoliberalism forever. So they don't want to think about strategy or tactics or how can we use social media to fight what Antonio Gramsci called the war of positions, the war of ideology against our ideological enemies who have been controlling these arenas for decades. Eddie, thank you for the hearts. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to anybody who sent super chats. And if you can't send super chats or super stickers or give your life savings to the American Communist Party like our friend Darg here, please like, share, and comment on the stream. All of that helps boost us in the algorithm that we were just talking about, as suppressing content like ours and boosting the kind of content that propels capitalism and imperialism and props it up. So help us fight that algorithmic suppression in the exact same way that I was just talking about, by liking, commenting, and sharing the stream. Thank you so much, everyone. Strategy and tactics is seen as compromising on your values. Yes, just like that video I recently posted about why I, as a Marxist-Leninist, support Yugoslavia, which was a market socialist society that had beef with the USSR. Or how I, as a Marxist-Leninist in America, support both China and the Soviet Union, even after the Sino-Soviet split. They split with each other, though, Eddie. China and the Soviet Union split with each other. They had a different theory. Okay, I'm an American. Both countries still have the working class in power. At the time, during the Sino-Soviet split, hypothetically, if I was alive, both countries will have the working class in power. Both countries are, trying to build communism, trying to combat imperialism, and they have the same goals as me. Both countries are radically different from the neoliberal, imperialist, capitalist United States. I support them, and I hope they both succeed. Now, in private, within my party, the American Communist Party, I might have a strong position, right? I might say, well, I think that China was 100% right during the Sino-Soviet split. They needed to have a cultural revolution, and they had all these ideas that they were right about where the Soviet Union was wrong. Or I might say the opposite, that China should have done what the Soviets did, blah, blah, blah. Or this is what China should do. This is what Venezuela should do, right? And I do have those positions, especially about Venezuela, because I've studied them the deepest. I do have my criticisms of Venezuela, right? But I'm not going to go announce those to the world on TikTok and just make a TikTok video where I make Venezuela look like crap. Right? Venezuela is socialist. I support them. China is socialist. I support them. The USSR was socialist. I support them. I might have my criticisms of them. I might have analysis of them and ideas for how they can improve. I might think one country is doing better than another country. But what I support is the fact that they're socialist. What I support is the fact that they're anti-imperialist. What I support is the fact that they're trying to march towards communism. And I understand that every country needs to take a unique path. So I'm not, this is what I'm saying. I'm not going to split with a country and condemn a country publicly, a socialist country publicly, and shit on that country and say that they're not socialist because of a disagreement about Marxist theory. Right? If the country is still saying we are a socialist country, we are building communism, we just have a different interpretation of Marxism than you do, slightly, right? That's not a reason to condemn them and say they're not socialist anymore. Now, those things need to be debated internally, right? If I meet with a member of the Communist Party of China and they ask me what critiques of their country I have, I could list a bunch of things, right? I've published comradely critiques of Venezuela where I say I support them, they're socialist, right? But they're not Marxist-Leninists. They took power through the ballot box, and they haven't done enough to crack down on US-backed right-wing forces in their country. They're still allowing CIA agents, essentially, or CIA-backed terrorists to run around in Venezuela because they don't want to arrest them because they'll be portrayed as authoritarian, right? I think Venezuela should just arrest people like Juan Guaido. If you're taking money from the CIA and helping to facilitate terror attacks in Venezuela, then yeah, you shouldn't be allowed to run around free and run in the elections. And I think that would help Venezuela build socialism if they could get rid of some of these CIA-backed elements. Right? But that doesn't mean I condemn Venezuela. That doesn't mean I say they're not socialist just because they're not doing everything that I want from a Marxist perspective, just because they're not building building socialism in the exact way that I want. Because guess what? They're still building socialism. They still have the same end goal as me in mind. They're still an anti-imperialist country that my country is waging a horrific hybrid war against and trying to destroy. You know, so how arrogant would it be for me to say, oh, the Venezuelans took power via elections, not a Marxist-Leninist revolution per se, even though there was a mass uprising and that's how they were able to take power in the election. But, oh, they took power via elections and Lenin says, you know, you should have a mass uprising. So they're not real socialists and I condemn them. And my country should keep them under 1,000 sanctions that are starving their people and depriving them of necessary medicine. Like, no, that's stupid. They're still fighting imperialism. My country's still trying to destroy them. They're still calling themselves socialists. They still massively increase the standard of living for their people. So do I, as a Marxist-Leninist, have my critiques of Venezuela that I'll share with other Marxist-Leninists or share while making sure it's clear that I still support their project as a whole? Sure. But, you know, these Maoists who come out and say China's bad, Cuba's bad, Venezuela's bad, Iran's bad, all these countries are bad because they're not following my exact Marxist, Maoist, ultra theory that I think is the only pure way to build socialism. Like, that is just so stupid to me. It's so stupid, especially because from a practical perspective here in the US, what does that do? What does that do? You don't need to spend your time demonizing China to people. The corporate media already does that. They're already doing that. And sure, maybe you don't think China's socialist, sure. But they've lifted 800 million people out of poverty. And our country is trying to push us towards World War III with them. Our ruling class is trying to push us towards World War III with them. So from a practical perspective, what are you doing by just shitting on China and talking about how they're evil? You're aiding imperialist propaganda. You're aiding an attack against a country which, whether you think it's socialist or not, U.S. interventionism makes the situation worse. I don't think Russia's socialist, right? I think, I know the Soviet Union collapsed in the 1990s, right? That doesn't mean I think NATO should invade them. That doesn't mean I think U.S. sanctions on them are justified. That doesn't mean I'm going to tell lies about Russia. And try to demonize them because they're not because they're not under the control of a communist party anymore. And justify what my country is trying to do to them. Who gives a shit if they're socialist? I want their people to thrive. They're going to have a way better chance of becoming socialist again and building socialism and bringing the Communist Party in Russia to power if the U.S. isn't trying to destroy them. You know, right now, the Communist Party has kind of had to put a lot of their political work on hold. And they've said, we support Putin because our country's in wartime, right? If their country wasn't in wartime, if they weren't having to deal with NATO, maybe the Communist Party in Russia could try to, overtake Putin as the main leader. But they can't do that right now because they got to focus on the damn war against NATO that our country's starting. So what do you do by shitting on all these U.S. enemy states for not having the perfectly correct Marxist theory? Like, thank you, Robbie Burns. Thank you. And let me pull that video up. Let me pull that video up so people know what I'm talking about, because I know some of you follow on YouTube, but not, Twitter, TikTok, all of those other things, which you should. Make sure you follow me on X at @EdB_Lagersmith also, which you're about to see my account here. So make sure you follow me here at @EdB_Lagersmith. I originally made this just as a private account where I could vent about all the things on the American left that annoyed me. But I very quickly learned that a lot of people shared my opinions about the American left and my criticisms of the American left. So more and more people started following this account, and eventually I just made it public. So very different from my TikTok, right? My TikTok is mostly aimed at political and economic education. My X is too, but I'll also engage in inner leftist debates on this. So, which is the reason I made it. And if you don't want to see that, I guess you don't have to follow, but is this the right one? No. Where is it? Here it is. So you're a Marxist-Leninist? Yes. So how... The Maoists were very mad at this one, by the way, of course. Let me know if anything's wrong with the sound. So you're a Marxist-Leninist? Yes. So how do you feel about Tito's Yugoslavia? I support them, and it was a capitalist imperialist war that brought about their dissolution. But they were market socialists who had beef with the economic model in the USSR. Yep, I still support them, and they were still socialist. But you're a Marxist-Leninist. Yes. So you think they should have followed the same path as the USSR? Every country has to build their own unique path to socialism. Okay, but what about Venezuela? I support them. They're socialist. But the Socialist Party ultimately took power through the ballot box, through elections, not a revolution. Well, the 1998 Venezuelan elections were made possible by a mass uprising of the people, but yeah, I still don't care. I support them. But they've said positive things about Trotsky and his theory of permanent revolution. You're a Marxist-Leninist. You hate Trotsky. I think it's stupid, but I don't care. Venezuelans know more about building socialism in Venezuela than I do. I'm just against my country sanctioning them and cooing them. But what about China? They split with the USSR. Don't care, they were still both Marxist-Leninist countries who I support. But how can they both be Marxist-Leninist if they split with each other because they're both so different? Because every country has a unique path to socialism, like I said. So what is socialism then, when the working class is in power instead of the capitalists? And is there anything that all of these different socialist countries have in common? They all massively increased living standards for working people and angered US imperialists by kicking out Western multinationals who were super exploiting them. So when you say Marxist-Leninist, you just mean that you support a society where the working class runs the government and the economy. Yes. Oh, okay. I think I'm one of those too then. So that's basically how I explain it. It was something that took me a little bit to understand as a Marxist myself. Just like with China, when I was like, but China has private markets. And especially at the time when I was first becoming a Marxist, there weren't as many pro-China voices out there. There weren't as many big pro-China socialists, like Danny Haifong and Vijay Prashad and Ben Norton and all these folks. So it wasn't as popular of a position to take. But reading Xi Jinping's governance of China really helped, and coming to understand these socialist projects better materially really helps in understanding what makes a country socialist. I saw Jonah Koch here. I wanted to talk about another one of these comments too. Jonah says, I like Danya Parampil's book on Venezuela. Kovalik has one too. Yes, this is one of my favorite books on Venezuela, The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela. If you are looking for like a brief and easy to read piece that will help you understand the situation in Venezuela, socialism in Venezuela, and the U.S. hybrid war against Venezuela, this is probably the best book to read. It's very quick and easy reading. It's written for working class people, easily understandable language. And it also discusses Haiti and Cuba and Nicaragua and basically U.S. regime change efforts in the Caribbean and Latin and Central America as a whole, not just Latin America. So that's a great book. But if you're looking for one that's more focused on Venezuela, if you're looking for a piece that will, if you're a beginner and you want to know about Venezuela and you want to be up to date on what's going on while doing as little reading as possible, read my thesis from college. One sec. Read my thesis from college. This is what I wrote when I got my undergraduate degree in politics. This is what I had to write as my final paper. And this is also one of the ways that we launched Midwestern Marx was with this essay, Neocolonialism in Venezuela and its coverage in Western media. So this is entirely focused on Venezuela, which is a little different than Kovalik's book, which expands on it a little bit. And it's just like a hyper-focused explanation on how Venezuela became dependent on oil, their struggle against colonialism, what Bolivar means to the country, how Chavez came to power, what happened when Chavez came to power, and how the U.S. has been able to hurt Venezuela with economic sanctions. So if you want to understand Venezuela today, while only doing, 20 pages of reading or so, this is the article. Not to toot my own horn, but I mean, I did write it for that explicit purpose, to help people understand Venezuela. And I know Anya Parampil has done other great stuff. Hey, Eddie, I hope you are doing okay. Did you try out for the Olympic? One sec. Did you try out for the Olympic American Wrestling team? If yes, how did it go? If not, why not? I did. Thank you for asking. I just got back from a run before I hopped on this stream, actually. I did not make the Olympic team. Making the Olympic team is extremely difficult, of course. Came short of that. However, in less than 4 weeks, in 3 weeks now, which is crazy, I am going to be competing in Nebraska to make the world team. So the world championships are like the Olympic championships, but they happen in the 3 years in between the Olympic championships. So, you have the Olympics every 4 years, and then in between those years are the world championships. And the Olympics are a little bit harder, because everybody wrestles the Olympics. But the world championships are still a huge deal. If you're a world champion, you're a legend in the sport of wrestling. Even if you're a world team member, you'll be a legend in your own country. So, they are having world championships this year, even though it's an Olympic year, because there are only 6 Olympic weights. This is confusing, but there are 6 Olympic weights and there are 10 weights at the world championships. So, during the Olympic years, there are only 6 weights that wrestle. During the non-Olympic years, there are 10 weights that wrestle. So the 4 weights that they didn't have at the Olympics this year, the 4 extra weights that compete at the Worlds in the years in between, they have their own world championships. They have their own basically mini Olympics now that's hosted in Albania. So it's not technically connected with the Olympics, and it's not technically the Olympics. It's the world championships, but it's still a huge deal. And it's still, the best wrestlers in the country. So I will be trying out for that in 3 weeks now. I've been training my ass off. Last week, I got 2 aura migraines. If you don't know what an aura migraine is, I just learned what they are. I've been getting them forever. I've never gotten 2 in a week, but your vision starts to get blurry. You see, like, it looks like electricity or like weird colors, like a wavelength, and it starts to go blurry. And you get that for 20 minutes to an hour, and then it goes away, and it's replaced by like the worst headache. Not the worst headache, but like a terrible headache for like hours afterwards. So I trained my ass off and then came home from training and started typing my paper on the gold standard. And apparently that was a bad idea. It was too much of a switch for my brain. And 2 days in a row, I got aura headaches. All of a sudden I couldn't see and my head just hurt. And then last night I slept 14 hours straight, which is like tying my record or a new record for me. I was so exhausted from doing intellectual work, party work, plus training. that I slept for 14 hours. But now I feel great. I feel awesome after the 14-hour rest. So no Olympics this year for me, but we're still working for the World Championships, and that's why I've been a little bit extra busy in the last 4 weeks. So, whoa, that's crazy. Yeah, it was kind of crazy. I'm fine though. Sounds scary. Yeah, my coach was a little worried that I was having a stroke, but thank you so much. Happy 65. Thank you. Eddie, any plans to have Dr. Montero back in the future? I loved hearing his perspective on CPUSA during the Winston days. Yes, we need to have him back so bad, especially with everything going on with HCP and CPUSA lately. He reached out to come on a while ago. We didn't make it happen for whatever reason, just because of busyness, I think. But yes, definitely want to have him back on soon to talk about CPUSA. Cuban wrestler won 5 consecutive golds at Greco-Roman. Do it, Eddie. I will. And have you seen his wall? Have you seen the wall of the Cuban wrestler who won the Olympics this year? So last year, or not last year, but one of the last times he won the Olympics, after the match, he said, "Shout out to the big boss Fidel," as in Fidel Castro. And it has been scrubbed from the internet. You can't find it anywhere. You can't find Mijain Lopez saying that anywhere. But yeah, he's super pro-revolution. I'm finding his wall right now to show you. Super pro-communist. And if you think about it, right, he's a big, he's insanely big, jacked up, black Afro-Cuban. Here it is. So if it wasn't for Fidel and if it wasn't for the revolution, the greatest wrestler of all time probably would have been working on a plantation, you know? Like, if there was no revolution, what would have happened to Mijain Lopez? He would have spent his days working on a sugar plantation or a tobacco plantation under the Batista dictatorship. But because of the revolution, people like him are now free to become athletes or pursue or chase their dreams. And they're actually supported by the government and by the society and by the revolution in the pursuit of their dreams and representing their country. So it makes perfect sense that Fidel Castro would mean a lot to this guy. I don't know about his ancestors, but I'm assuming they were probably plantation laborers. But what he did is incredible. It's impossible to even explain how incredible it is. He's a 6-time Olympic medalist and a 5-time Olympic champion, right? In wrestling, usually your prime is over when you hit 32. He's in his 40s. So because they have the Olympics every 4 years, most of the best wrestlers only have 2 Olympic championships and maybe 3. If you have 3, you're incredible. You're, in the talks for being the best of all time. He has 5. So every 4 years they have the Olympics. And he's a 6-time Olympic placer. What's 6 times 4? 12, 18, 24. He's been wrestling for 24 years, and he's been at the top of the heavyweight division for 20 of them. And he's a communist who has a picture of Fidel Castro on his wall, overlooking him when he sleeps. Got to be the most base thing I've ever seen. What a hero. What a freaking legend. Mijain Lopez is right up there with me, for me, with Che Guevara when it comes to the greatest heroes of my life. Well, you got Nelson Mandela meeting with Fidel up there too. Right there. Another Fidel giving the solidarity fist. And he's just hanging up that gold medal with all the others. What a legend. Greater than Karelin? Definitely. Karelin was unreal. Karelin only lost 1 time, right? And in 2000, Mijain Lopez got 5th, and Karelin lost that year to Roland Gardner from America, who beat Mijain in the semis. But Mijain was very young then, right? So when Karelin was leaving the scene, Mijain was just coming on the scene. That was the only time Karelin ever lost. Right. But after that, and part of the reason that Karelin lost was because the sport of Greco-Roman was evolving. Right. The sport was starting to get better, and the athletes were getting better, and the training was getting better, and the technique was getting better. and people were figuring out how to counter Karelin's moves because he had been doing them for years. It's just something that happens in wrestling. All right, so Karelin's last match, he lost. He came, back to try and win one more Olympic, and he got beat. It was kind of a stupid match. He should have won. He was a better wrestler, but he got beat. And I think, what was he, a 3-time Olympic champ? And that would have been his 4th. So Karelin's a 3-timer. Mijain's a 5-timer. Mijain almost has double the medals of Alexander Karelin, which is crazy to say. But if Karelin had won that last Olympics, then I think he would still be the best because he would have retired undefeated, right? And he would have had 4. So you say Mijain's got 5, Karelin's got 4, but Karelin had no losses, so Karelin's better. But now we have Karelin had 3, Mijain has 5, and Mijain dominated in his last match ever, whereas Karelin lost his last match ever. So Mijain was still able to dominate even as he got old and he wasn't as athletic. Whereas Karelin was, but he lost one match. It's hard to. It sounds like I'm downplaying Alexander Karelin, which is so ridiculous because he's such an amazing freaking legend of the sport. But I give it to Mijain on that. Do people know who Karelin is? If you don't know who Karelin is, you're in for a treat when I show you this motherfucker. This guy went on to be a politician in Russia. Oops, I forgot. I unshared the screen. This is Alexander Karelin, the Russian science experiment. Only lost one match in his life to this man, Rulon Gardner, who I'm actually buddies with. He comes in and trains in my wrestling room. So I have wrestled and hung out with and been coached by the only man to beat Alexander Karelin. Go me. Here's the question we were just debating, Karelin versus Lopez. That'll be a debate for years in the Greco-Roman wrestling community now because of what Lopez just did. It's amazing how many good wrestlers Cuba is able to produce compared to other island countries and other Central American countries. Real AF, absolutely. Absolutely. Chael Sonnen said Mijain threw the match for money. Yeah, that's the other thing. I forgot about that because I've heard that from other legends of the sport, not just Chael Sonnen, but like other people who just Chael was a Greco-Roman wrestler too. I've heard that year, Mijain and some of the other Cubans got paid to throw their matches. I don't know if that's true. I don't want to throw dirt on Mijain's name, but I've heard that as well. Not just from Chael, but I don't know. I hope that's not true. Otherwise, he could have been a 6-timer. Crazy. It's insane watching Mijain wrestle, though. Like, he just never takes a backward step. He doesn't even look like he's trying that hard, but nobody can move him at all, and he just pushes him. He's too strong. It's insane. Karelin and Lopez are proof Lysenkoism is real. Kind of. And I mean, in many ways, Mijain Lopez is a product of Karelin and the Russian system, because the reason that Cuba produces so many good wrestlers, or one of the reasons, I mean, it's communism and their planned economy, but it's also the fact that the Soviets gave them their system for producing wrestlers and weightlifters. So they just got to copy the Soviet system verbatim that the Americans never got access to, unless you go over there and train with them and try to understand it yourself, which people have done. But so the Cubans got to copy the Soviet system that produced Karelin, and they used it to produce Lopez. War of positioning. Lysenkoism was like the Soviet genetic biology. And if it was the idea that like genes can be altered by behavior and by environment, and that genes aren't just this static, unchanging thing that you pass down to your kids hereditarily. So it's more like nurture, the debate nature versus nurture. It's more like saying nurture matters a little bit more, but also nature matters more, because it's not just nurture. It's not just your actions that make a difference. It's your environment that can affect your genes. But anyways, a lot of Lysenko was dismissed as wrong, an idiot. He was trying to force dialectical materialism where it didn't belong. Western biology has all the answers. But now Western biology is developing this field called epigenetics based on Lamarckism. And basically the idea is that your environment and your actions can change how you pass on your genes to your kids. So basically the exact thing that Lysenko was saying in the 1900s, because he was applying dialectical materialism to the field of evolutionary biology. The same way that Ingalls did with the field of anthropology and origins of the family, private property, and the state, that helped him to predict things in the field of anthropology that wouldn't be proven for hundreds of years or over 100 years. In similar ways, the Soviet biologists and evolutionary biologists and agricultural scientists and agronomists, and this is why they were able to make advancements too, because they were actually asking real material questions, not just theoretical questions, but how do we grow food faster? By asking themselves these questions and by applying dialectical materialism, they were basically able to come up with the field of epigenetics like 100 years early. Darg would know this better than me. The organism's intent and action to adapt to its environment has an impact on heredity, or hereditary. I think heredity is what he meant. Darwin was also open to this, but the neo-Darwinists are not. Yes, it goes against what's called neo-Darwinism, which is basically just like this dogmatic, unthinking Zionism, Darwinism, which, as Darg is saying, goes against Darwin himself, right? Who was a scientist, who was would have been open to this idea of, so-called Lysenkoism, or the idea, this idea related to genes. But what the neo-Darwinists do is they take his theory and they, make it dogmatic. It's the same thing that Maoists today do with Mao. Like, one of the main things that I wrote in the Little Red Book when I was reading it, I wrote this like 100 times, is Mao would disagree with modern Maoists. Modern Maoists read Mao's theory and they turn it into a religion. They turn it into a dogma. The neo-Darwinists do the same thing with Darwin. So when new research comes along, they're just like, no, Darwin wouldn't have liked this. When in reality, Darwin himself, who they're speaking for now, would have been like, no, let me see the new research. Let me see the research which builds upon the research I did in the Galapagoses. I'm going to get people angry talking about Lysenkoism, but I think more people are coming around on it now. When I first did the video about Lysenko, people were so mad. Carlos was worried. He's like, did you mess something up in this? People are mad, like, I know you're not a biologist. I'm like, no, I swear I didn't. Mendel faked his pea plant data to support the ideology of the Catholic Church, had a connection to the idea of original sin. That's interesting. I believe it. Mendel, for those who don't know, he did all of his research in whatever it's called, like a church or like a monastery, but not for nuns, for men, whatever you call that. He was like a priest, and he did all of his research in like the garden outside. I remember learning that. I don't know much about him faking it, but no, please keep the legacy of Comrade Lysenko alive. Yeah. And the other thing is they try to blame him for the Holodomor, which is hilarious because they say the Holodomor was on purpose by Stalin. And then they turn around and say, well, the Holodomor happened by accident because Lysenko was so stupid and he didn't understand how to grow enough wheat. It's like, well, what was it? Was it Stalin, or was it Lysenko, or, was it Lysenko's accident because he was such a dum-dum, or was it Stalin's malevolence because he was so evil? Or was it the fact that there was nasty weather conditions that created a famine while the kulak landlords were hoarding grain? Which one seems more likely? Sorry, I derailed the stream by bringing up Lysenko. You're good. I was just about to go on to the next segment, and then I go on this Lysenko rant. I left and came back. What the F are we talking about? Lysenkoism, which I don't even know if that's a real word, but let's move on to this because I want to talk about this. I saw it on Comrade Rathbone, who's a fellow TikTok creator, who creates someone who really fantastic TikTok content and like skit content. Let me full screen this. And he was reacting to this video. I think he was actually reacting to a reaction because I think Hassan Piker reacted to the same thing. But it's Dan Bilzerian talking about Zionism in the white and blue country and he's anti-Zionist. So of course he says a bunch of stuff that's based, right? He calls out the Zionist entity for a lot of the negative stuff that they're doing, but then he goes into Nick Fuentes' jibber jabber brain rot ideology, where he tries to conflate Zionism with Judaism. So I feel like this will be a good learning moment for all of us.
Life from a extreme standpoint, right? A Michael Jordan, it's an extreme life, you know, the life you're living. Trump, it's an extreme life. You don't have to be that extreme to win in media, real estate, and politics. It's extreme. Why are you putting yourself through that kind of a life? In bodybuilding, in fame, in celebrity, all of that stuff. What did you have a moment as a kid where it was like the most painful moment that impacted you for the rest of your life? Like, was there a moment?
I know there wasn't any like one moment. I think I got a lack of attention as a kid, and the fame thing was more of a social experiment, and it was more just like I'm gonna do a bucket list of all the things that I want to do, because I made a bunch of money and kind of had a lot of time, and I was overplaying the poker. So, and Instagram was kind of like a new thing, and social media, and also it was a little bit of a fuck you to the ex-girlfriend. It was like kind of like the perfect storm of just like, let's see what we can do with this. And I also knew that it would correlate to getting more girls too, because it was kind of like a little bit of a dating app, if we're being honest. And so yeah, I just kind of like went down the road a little bit, and then we went down the road a lot of bit, and then it was kind of like spiraled out of control. And I think the reason why I did well is because it was just stuff I wanted to do, like I just wanted to do all those things. And so when I got the time and I got the money to do them, I just kind of, went through the bucket list and checked all the boxes, and we went all the way down the road of hedonism and documented it, so to a level that, at one point it was like.
So what's the deal with Dan now? I haven't seen this whole clip yet, only the part about Zionism, but I know we can give a little bit of a summary for those who don't know who he is at all. He said he made his money making or playing poker. That ended up not really being the case. It was kind of like a pyramid scheme or like a get rich quick scam or whatever. I don't know, but he was basically, he had a business, a weed business or something that he launched once he became famous on Instagram, and he was using that business to fund, pay for these, gorgeous models to be surrounding him all the time, wearing very little clothes. And he was known as the king of Instagram for a while. He would post these videos of him shooting big guns with, half naked women and riding jet skis and boats and just living what he said, basically the hedonistic, luxurious lifestyle, like taking it as far as it can go. But recently he's been doing all this anti-Zionist content after he got caught kind of being a scammer and a liar and not making as much money as he was saying he was through poker, and making his money through other nefarious means. So I imagine that this is just, if he's genuinely anti-Zionist, that's great. If he's genuinely seen the pictures of Palestinians being blown up and it's affected him, given him a change of heart, that's great. I feel like it's more of a grift, more of like a shift towards, okay, people are sick of my hedonistic, fake, I'm the man lifestyle. Nobody is buying it anymore, or, a lot of people aren't even supporting that anymore. There's a lot of people who used to like stuff like that who are now shifting towards, I don't know, people like Andrew Tate, or people who are, I guess Andrew Tate's not more critical of that lifestyle, but, more people are becoming critical of that hedonistic, luxurious lifestyle. So I wonder if Dan Bilzerian's making a shift towards, I regret that. I regret that hedonism, combined with a little bit of anti-Zionist and Nick Fuentes-ish politics. Seems like a grift, but.
18-year-old boy's dream to say, man, I'm vicariously living through what you're doing with your life, all the crazy stuff that you were doing. So it wasn't anything where as a kid, you're like, I'm going to prove these guys wrong. I'm going to prove this guy that I'm going to be somebody. This is what I went through. The world's going to know who I am and what I'm doing.
No, it wasn't so much that. I mean, there is always like an element of insecurity, like, wanting to show people up, right? Or, prove people wrong. There's always going to be some of that. But I think for me, I just really kind of like wanted to see how far I could take it. Because I started doing the Instagram a little bit, and then it was almost like treated like a video game. It was like, how high can we get the score? And it was also like in conjunction with, I just made, $50-60 million that year playing poker. And
I relate to that. I relate to how high can we take the score with the pro-felicity and with being an influencer, a content creator. But for me, that really got undercut when I got banned for the first time, because I would just, I was so obsessed with my followers, more followers, more followers, more followers, more followers, just build, 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 build. And it feels good. But then you get it all taken away, and it's like, oh, this is nothing, right? This is temporary. This can be taken away in the blink of an eye. You have to build a real movement. You have to build a real party if you want to get people together in a collective and help them get educated and actually organized. But obviously, my goals with social media were a lot different than Dan Bilzerian's goals. I can only imagine how rotted your brain gets when all you're trying to do is push the hedonism as far as you possibly can in order to maximize your followers. Like, what a freaking sort of sick life that would be. Not sick in a good way, but
things were going good, and I was making money left, right, and center, like way faster than I could spend it. And I don't know, they had a good synergy. It was like I wanted to do all these things, and those were also the things that like a lot of other guys wanted to do, and they're responding really positively to that. So it was very interesting to the audience. And I was also kind of like, fuck it. Like I didn't have a job. Like I didn't care what my parents thought. I just didn't give a shit what anybody had to say. So I was able to like really just put it out there raw in a way that other people, I don't think have ever done before. And I think, and in the captions too, just like the way I would caption things. I mean, it was
that's also true. Like people like Andrew Tate have the freedom to say these things and not get canceled. They have the balls to say these things because they have, businesses like Andrew Tate at his sex trafficking business or whatever he was doing. If you have the material security to speak out, it allows you to speak out, or it allows you to speak out more than a working class person who could get fired and lose their job. And I did, right? People know I did lose my job at the university for the politics that I have, but thankfully I was able to increase, our social media presence and content to the point where I can usually somewhat support myself, and then started another wrestling club too. But that it's impossible for most people to speak out because of capitalism and because of the situation that they're in. And that's how, there really is no free speech under capitalism, because your boss can fire you for anything that you say. So you have to toe the line if you want to keep your job. And by the way, Midwestern Marx is a people's funded institute. Patreon.com/Midwestern Marx, as well as our super chats here on YouTube, are how we make all of our income for the most part, as well as our book sales and stuff like that, which you can find at midwesternmarx.com if you want to check out our books. Or become a YouTube member. You get a copy of Carlos's The Purity Fetish if you're a $10 YouTube member. Any super chat questions I will answer as soon as possible. But YouTube does take a percentage of your super chat. So if you don't have a question, you just want to help support us, Patreon is the best way to do it. Just saying, they take the least percentage of your money. But yeah, thank you, El Jimenez, for the $5 super sticker right on time as I was doing the shameless plug for the Institute. It's not a shameless plug, because any super stickers like this you give to the Institute are going to the work of the American Communist Party and furthering the class struggle here in the United States, but as well as making sure that I don't die. But thank you, El.
just like, fuck it, this is what I'm going to say, and see what happens. It's kind of like throwing a grenade in the toilet. That's going to be interesting. We don't know what's going to happen, but it'll be interesting to watch. So like even with the wedding picture, you're like, I'm finally doing it, right? Don't sound like everybody's like, oh my God, he's married. But going back to, I'm Armenian, you're Armenian, your father's Armenian, your mom is, she's Norwegian and Swiss. I'm a bit of mud. Yeah. So growing up with an Armenian dad, was he a typical Armenian dad? Like, hey, when you and your brother, when you guys grow up, you got to do this, and you got to do this, and you got to do this, or did he kind of leave you guys alone? I would say my dad was anything but typical of anything. He was a very strange, like unique person, and he was not around very much, and he was really, really focused.
Exodus says it's hard to grift being an anti-Zionist when you're that big, though. Shadow banning and banning in general is real true. Yeah, and then your social group becomes the people who you're around. So like that's what we're seeing with Candace Owens right now. She comes out against Zionism and she gets expelled from, not just from her job at the Daily Wire, from her position as being a pro-Zionist propagandist, but she also gets out excised from her social group. So the people who she used to hang out with and the people she considered her friends and are no longer having her back and being her friend. And of course, we know we are who we surround ourselves with, right? We're all products of our environment. There's that old saying, like, you become the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And that's hard when you get pushed out of your social group. Everybody wants to be a people pleaser, at least with those around us or those we consider our friends. So there are, implications that come with being a famous person, an influencer or whatever, who comes out as anti-Zionist, and there are unique social and financial pressures on influencers. But at the same time, they're still the only people, or people with money and wealth are still, the only ones who have the power to actually come out and speak on this without having their method of gathering the means of subsistence taken away.
For some business. And when he was around, it was for sports, and he was like basically a drill instructor. I mean, it was like hardcore to the door, 2 hours.
Let's get to the Zionism, Dan.
A lot of attention from him. And so
wait, did I click on the wrong button? I don't know why I clicked on this one. This says his road to hedonism. This doesn't even say anything about Zionism. So I messed that up. Sorry about that. Well, I guess we got to talk about hedonism and Dan Bilzerian a little bit. It looks like we're gonna have to do a reaction to a reaction here. The same thing that Rathbone did. Oh well, I don't really.
All right, let's take a look at Patrick Bet-David.
I guess we'll listen to a little.
It's very like 4chan.
A little Hassan as well. Oh my goodness, I made my screen glitch out. What's going on here? Okay, we're good.
All right, let's take a look at Patrick Bet-David.
The Middle East and the world would
I'm willing to bet you are going to be shocked at what this conversation looks like when you find out who is on the other side.
be a better place if Israel didn't exist.
yes,
Okay.
Israel's committed, so many terrorist attacks. They're stealing land right now. They're operating apartheid. They're currently committing a genocide on Palestinians. Like, do you believe in the genocide they're committing?
I think they're fighting for themselves and they're defending themselves.
Do you think that's defense?
Well,
When 1,200 people died,
Yeah.
of which the 1,200 you've killed, and admitted that
Right.
you've killed a lot during, your
I'll
handle.
tell you this. I'll tell you this.
Bro, I gave you a warning. Chat, I gave you a warning. I told you have no idea who he's talking to, and you are not ready for what he is about to say, okay? And that warning wasn't enough. Nothing could have prepared you for the rest of this video.
Part I question where people who are Jewish can't stand when I say this. I don't know how you, Netanyahu, claim you have the best intelligence in the world, Mossad, and you didn't know that on October 7th they're
They
attacking
knew about it. They didn't. They wanted it to happen, so they had a reason to take that. Yeah, they wanted a reason to take the land.
I totally get
And
it.
they killed their own citizens. And they claimed that all these people that was bull. They claimed beheaded babies. That was bull. Everything that they said was a complete. Not only was it a lie, but they committed all those atrocities themselves to the Palestinians and been caught doing it. In fact, they just got caught gang Palestinians. How many babies have they killed? All the things that they accuse the Palestinians of, or Hamas of, or whatever, they are guilty of 100-fold themselves.
So
Completely true, completely based, 100% right. And I'm assuming Exodus seems to know here. You can see Patrick shitting himself. Is this Patrick Bet-David guy a Zionist? Is he a hardcore Zio? I don't watch his show or find him interesting or worth my time at all. He just seems like one of these person who values wealth and material success under capitalism above all things. But yeah, he doesn't seem super happy with what Bilzerian just said. The only thing I would have added there, if I was Dan Bilzerian, was the Hannibal Doctrine, right? I would have said, yeah, Israel fired on their own civilians, and if you don't believe me, well, for one, there's tons of eyewitness evidence, but for two, they have legal precedent to do that. The IDF has this thing called the Hannibal Doctrine, where if an Israeli soldier is taken hostage, which, the vast majority of Israelis are soldiers or former soldiers because military service is mandatory. If an Israeli soldier is taken hostage, it's better to kill them. It's better to unalive them so that they can't give information to the enemy, and so that you can unalive the enemy as well, the people holding them hostage. So it's literally Israeli military policy to fire on their own civilians on October 7th. And, some people made it seem like it was planned by Israel from the beginning, that they wanted October 7th to happen so they could launch the following genocide. I don't think that's right. I think Operation Al-Aqsa Flood was a real operation by the Palestinian resistance. And I think that the Palestinian resistance in many ways expected this response from the Israelis, and we're hoping that it would have the effect that it did, where much of the world, and especially, Hezbollah and the Houthis turn against Israel, or, you know, the Houthis and Hezbollah were already against Israel, but they kick it into gear. They kick their resistance into gear. I think that's very likely what the resistance leadership was trying to ignite. I don't know if they, you know, if this was their plan for sure, whatever. I just don't think Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, aka October 7th, was, you know, like a Mossad psyop or anything. That being said, everything he said was true about them firing on their own civilians and whatnot. I really hate this dude, but he's 100 based. Yes, Patrick Bet David is a Zio shill. Okay, thank you, Exodus, for catching me up on the characters here.
And they've been doing that. Like October 7th wasn't the start of this. Like the start of this was Nakba. They've done so many disagree.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah, so I mean, this is not like, it's not like October 7th is like, just all of a sudden they just came over there unsolicited and just killed people. Like they have been killing Palestinians for years and years, operating two sets of justice. You know, it's like they have the justice.
I don't know what is going on. Okay. I don't understand what is happening where this goddamn manlet demon.
Hassan can't understand when anybody who doesn't share his cultural values, who doesn't share his social positions, takes a based position, right? If somebody who isn't, you know, screaming about wokeism and tolerance and how everybody's a bigot and a misogynist and how all Trump supporters are bigot, fascist hogs, if they don't have all those positions and they say something based, Hassan's like, what? What? It's possible for someone who doesn't have a rainbow flag on every piece of clothing they own to take a based position? What? It's possible for people who aren't screaming about LGBTQ issues to be anti-Zionist or anti-imperialist? What? It doesn't make sense in his brain, which is still trapped in the left-right dichotomy. And, you know, I don't hate Hassan as much as some people. I think he's a good funnel to the left, or a good pathway to the left, and people like Midwestern Marx. But ever since he called the American Communist Party a crypto scam, which was a lie, a fabrication, something that's completely untrue and never has been true, and which was put out by people who don't like the party as a smear to tear us down, ever since Hassan repeated that lie on his stream and never corrected it, told his millions of followers that one of the most active communist parties in America is a crypto scam, instead of encouraging them to get involved and get active and actually do something to fix this country, instead of just putting him in a freaking mansion. Instead of doing that, he called us a crypto scam. So you don't get any more, you know, we need to see the positive side of Hassan. We all see the positive side of Hassan. He's a socialist with 1 million followers. Right? That's not a terrible thing. All right. But I'm done being super nice with my criticisms. If you're going to call my party, if you're going to lie about my party and call it a crypto scam, I'm going to call you out for having 1 million followers, but not pushing them to actually organize and just living in a mansion. Or I'm going to call you out for being hyper obsessed with gender and identity politics and making it seem like nobody who has all the correct PC identity politics positions can be on the left or can be an anti-imperialist. I'm just going to call it how it is from now on, Hassan.
And not the other. That is my suspicion. Okay.
Justice for the Palestinians, the justice for the Israelis. And if you read the Talmud, like, you know, if you're basically not a human, you're like, you know, like cattle. If a Jew is, you know, is killed by, you know, somebody that's not Jewish, then it's the death penalty. If a Jew kills somebody that's not a Jew, then, you know, you can't kill them. It's not the death penalty. Like they literally like segregate in their Bible.
They're very protective of them.
Okay.
So this is where Dan Bilzerian goes off the rails, and this is where he needs to read On Zionist Literature by Ghassan Kanafani, because he's trying to say that the things we're seeing in Israel, the things that the Zionist entity is doing, are a product of the Talmud, are a product of the Jewish religion, which is this uniquely evil and murderous religion, right? It's the same thing that people say about Islam when they're talking about ISIS. Right? ISIS says, you know, the call for jihad, the call for a spiritual war means a real war, and they need to go behead citizens and behead the infidels. And, you know, clearly this shows that Islam is a violent religion, even though the vast majority of Islamic groups are nonviolent and hate ISIS and see this as a distortion of their religion. And with Zionism, it's a little different because so much money has been spent pushing the Zionist ideology on the Jewish community and through Jewish religious institutions. And again, read this book. So, you know, the majority of Jewish people are Zionists because of that. But that doesn't mean that Judaism is Zionism or that Zionism is rooted in Judaism. What happened, and this is what Ghassan Kanafani says, who's not a Jewish person. He's a Palestinian author and intellectual who was commissioned by his political party, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, to write this book on why Zionism is so popular and how it became so popular. And what he found was that socioeconomic elites in Europe, the rich colonialists, the rich imperialists, including the rich people within the Jewish community, invented this Zionist ideology because they wanted to colonize another part of the world, because they wanted, you know, to take over a country and control its resources and be the ruling class. And at points, they were talking about putting Israel in Africa. Right, these wealthy European colonialists were talking about planting Israel right on top of an African country, but eventually they settled on Palestine, and then they started taking Jewish literature, taking Jewish religious principles and texts that had existed for thousands of years previously, and manipulating them and twisting them and turning them into Zionist literature. So, by example, and this is covered in detail in this book, there was a character archetype or a Jewish religious story about the wandering Jew. And it kind of talks about the oppression and the lack of a real homeland that Jewish people have faced throughout their history, always being a minority group in a country and facing the discrimination and oppression that can come with that. And the story would focus on the wandering Jew, this Jewish person who wanders without a homeland of their own. And it's about their relationship with God and how they come to know God better through their story and through their struggle. That was the wandering Jew character archetype. But when these wealthy Zionists come along, they take the wandering Jew stories that had existed for thousands of years, or hundreds of years at least, and they say, well, guess what? There's a new story. When the wandering Jew goes to Palestine, when he goes and colonizes this land, when he becomes a Zionist, he's no longer wandering. He's now home. The wandering Jew has found his home. So this character archetype that had existed for thousands of years was manipulated and turned into a Zionist character. And this is how the socioeconomic elites in Europe, the original Zionists, took Jewish religious literature and manipulated it and turned it into Zionist literature, and then said, if you don't support Zionism, you're not a real Jew. If you don't support Zionism, then you're anti-Semitic. It's not true. Zionism is absolutely separate from Judaism. It's a manipulation of Judaism. Anybody who truly believes in Judaism, like a lot of the Orthodox Jews, will be anti-Israel, because Israel takes the Jewish religion and manipulates it to justify colonialism. So if you're an anti-Zionist and you're saying that Zionism is the same as Judaism, you are pushing a Zionist talking point. You are pushing one of their core propaganda points, which is that we are the true Jews. We are the representatives of Judaism. Judaism does mean, mass murdering babies. It's not true. It's a manipulation that emerged in the 1800s because rich people wanted to conquer a certain place. But that's what the Zionists say. So if you accept that premise as an anti-Zionist, if you do the Nick Fuentes thing and say, yeah, everything the Zionists say is true, they are the true representation of Judaism and the Jews, you're helping them to push their propaganda narrative, and you're not seeing the reality. The reality is that Zionism and the Zionist entity are arms of Western imperialism and Western colonialism. The reality is that any religion can be manipulated in order to justify colonialism and imperialism. And the reality, and people need to read this book as well as Norm Finkelstein's The Holocaust Industry. And the reality is that socioeconomic elites in Europe invented the Zionist ideology, used it to manipulate the Jewish religion for the purpose of colonialism. Right? It's not that they did colonialism because of their religion, because they sat down and read the Talmud and they were like, yes, we need to take over Palestine. No, it was socioeconomic elites who wanted to take over Palestine or someplace in Africa. And so they use Jewish religious texts to justify that and craft an ideology that justified that. That is what happened. It's not because the Jewish religion is uniquely bad. We know there are extremists in every religion. Every religion can be used and twisted to political extremism. Even Buddhism is used to push for, a return to feudalism in China, a return to the era of peasants and giant feudal landlords who torture you. So even Buddhism, which is considered the most peaceful, non power hungry religion, has extremists and can be manipulated. Hassan brothel, interesting Googling. Okay, I don't know what that means, but thank you so much, Lawn Guy 1990. I'm gonna take that comment down before Hassan sues me or something, but I'm definitely not Googling what you said right now. Oh, that's bad. He really did that? I don't like that at all, you guys. I don't like that at all. He can't sue me for that because it's true, you guys. You went to a brothel. Everybody makes mistakes. When Hassan went to a brothel, I don't think I had quit watching porn yet, but so hopefully he changed. Hopefully he realized that sex work is so popular under capitalism because women need a way to survive and put food on the table for themselves and their kids. And so they're forced to sell their bodies. And so that you, as a rich man, taking advantage of that to buy their bodies and utilize their bodies for your own pleasure. I hope you've come to realize how sick that is. I hate strip clubs. You get by my normie friends, when they bring up strip clubs, they always get a lecture like that from me. Yeah, you want to sit there like that, the 400-pound depressed guy in the front, just paying for love. Love me, love me, love me. Take my money and love me. You know how fucking sad that is? That's just what I say to my friends. Have you seen the Chinese movie The Wandering Earth and its sequel? I have not seen that, but thank you so much for the Argentinian super chats, Battle Cossack. Hope you're doing well, brother. Another one from Battle Cossack. Thank you. On fire with the super chats today. Thank you very much. The Zionists considered to establish Israel in Argentina. That's why there are so many pro-Israeli Jews here. Oh, really? I did not know that. I knew they were thinking about doing it in Africa, but I didn't know Argentina was on the list. Very interesting. Thank you, Battle Cossack, for the 50 Argentinian bucks.
Okay, I spoke too soon. He immediately packed it up with some weird ass. God damn it, dude. I spoke way too.
He's been good friends with a porn star for ages, and that I don't even mind, because it's not the sex workers as individuals. I'm not saying you need to hate on sex workers as individuals. I'm mutuals with people who have done sex work or maybe have like an OnlyFans. Whatever. I don't agree with the sex trade, right? I don't agree with the fact that individuals are being pressured into doing that stuff. But being friends with someone who does sex work and being against, while still being against the sex trade is a lot different than, paying them for sex, using the fact that the sex trade exists because of capitalism to get your rocks off and prey on women. I hate it, bro. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Strip clubs are the most sad thing ever, but for people like Hassan Slippery, Jesus Christ. I didn't read that comment before I brought it up. I don't know that Hassan would say strip clubs are liberating, but yeah, they're the saddest thing ever, dude.
Too soon, okay? I literally paused it right up until the moment where
it's not consensual if you have no real option. Just a fact. Exactly. I mean, you could argue that consensual sex is very rare under capitalism because, economic considerations do come into account so often. But yeah, when it comes to a strip club, or an OnlyFans account, the women who are in that position might say that they do it because they like it, or they would do it even if they had other options. But we know for a fact the vast majority of them are there because they need to eat or feed their kids. And there's nothing else they can do. And to pay for that and to prey on them, all right, I got to let it go. That one's hard for me to let go. That's like, a personal thing for me, even more than a political thing, where I'm like, don't do that. Don't do that. And that makes me lose respect.
This mother starts talking about the Talmud and shit like that. Okay. Well, there you go. He's not been taken over by the ghost of Noam Chomsky. Okay. Maybe it's the third thing. Okay. Maybe it's the third thing. I was wrong. Okay. Especially because, yeah, there's no relevance to the Talmud when you're talking about Israel. Okay. Get out of here.
There is relevance, though. That's not true either, because, like I said, the Jewish religious texts were taken by the Zionists and manipulated, right, and used to justify Zionism. So there is relevance. You don't just want to totally ignore the Jewish religious texts and or ignore the fact that Israel is a Jewish supremacist state, because that's what it is, right? There's an element of white supremacy there too, because you have people from Europe and America, mostly whites, coming and conquering a land of Arab people who are mostly brown, right? But the Jewish the Zionist ideology and constitution and country is rooted in Jewish supremacy, not in, white supremacy. Like, there's two separate laws and two separate court systems for Arabs versus Jewish people, regardless of the color of those Jewish people. So it is a state that's rooted in Jewish supremacy and the supremacy of people who have, Jewish roots, or a Jewish mother, is how Judaism is passed down. But it's not that the Talmud and the Torah are completely irrelevant. It's that the Talmud and the Torah have been manipulated by Zionists to justify Israel, which is why Orthodox Jews are the original anti-Zionists, which is why Orthodox Jews remain opposed to Zionism to this day. Because they say, no, the Talmud and the Torah and Jewish religious texts and the Jewish religious tradition does not support this. All right. This is against, not only are we against this politically, but we're against this on religious grounds.
That's number one. Number two, there are literally so many things that you can actually point to in terms of like Israel being a apartheid state and having two different tiers for how to deal with Palestinians and how to deal with its own Jewish population versus its own non-Jewish population. Like, there are so many things that are literally right.
This is a good point by Lorshek Mulsek, because I've seen people deny that there's an element of white supremacy to the Zionist entity. But this proves it. Black Jews from Africa aren't treated good in Israel. Right. There's absolutely a layer of anti-black racism, or just not anti-black racism specifically, but white supremacist racism, anti-black, brown, Asian, anything that's not white racism. That's layered in. But the Constitution and the actual legal system and the ideology is rooted in Jewish supremacy, technically. But yeah, there is that white supremacist layer, and I think that proves it. The fact that Jews from Africa who have black skin aren't treated well in Israel shows that there is a white supremacist element to the Jewish supremacist society.
Right there for you to point to. So when you have all of that, but then you turn around and you start talking about like the Talmud as a point of reference, it's like, oh God, how are you so close? And then you just like immediately pivot. What is really sad, maybe a little scary actually, about this kind of thing is that I am always very fearful. I'm always very fearful that like an anti-Semitic, anti-Israel way of arguing is significantly easier for like the dumbest people to understand than the actual anti-Zionist argument from a materialist point of view. This is a legitimate issue. It is so much easier to just talk about like and be like, oh, Jews are conniving. Come on, you know this, and have like a ton of people.
This is all true. I agree with everything Hassan's saying, and it's rooted in feelings, right? I had a coach who used to say something that was very dialectical. He said, what you focus on expands, meaning the more you focus on something, the more you understand it, and the more you'll see that thing everywhere, right? So if you just hyper focus on Israel for a while and all of Israel's crimes, and then you blame the Jews for their crimes, or for those crimes, if you accept Israel's premise that Zionism is equivalent to Judaism, then you start blaming the Jews. Then you look at AIPAC, right? Then you look at these organizations in the US, then you look at a few of the people on Wall Street, or a few of the people who own big banks, or are co-owners in big banks who are Jewish. And you start to see it everywhere. What you focus on expands, right? And all of a sudden, all you're looking for, because this becomes your worldview, is Jewish people everywhere. And there's that hilarious clip of Haz al-Din, mocking anti-Semites having arguments with each other. And they're like, he's Jewish and they're Jewish. And then one of them comes in, they're like, no, Putin is the real Jew. And they're just, going schizophrenic, trying to somehow say that every powerful country in the world or every powerful institution is being run by Jewish people, when it's obviously not. When some of the richest people and most powerful people in the world, like Bill Gates, don't have an ounce of Jewish lineage in them. So it turns you schizophrenic, and you just start seeing Jewish people everywhere, because what you focus on expands. And you have no real materialist way to explain what you're seeing, to explain what's going on. Yeah.
People agree with you than it is to be like, this is America's material interest in the region because they want an unsinkable aircraft carrier in a resource-rich region, and that's why they are so unconditionally loyal to this country that is becoming increasingly more right-wing and insane. And it's just when you try to describe it on those terms, everyone's like, shut the fuck up, you nerd. What are you, some?
He's doing a really good job here. All this is true. I don't think he has the deepest understanding of the history of the Zionist ideology, which is why I'm always saying that this book is super important. But I like what he's saying here for the most part.
Kind of communist. Shut your up. No, it's because they want to control the goy. Okay, that's what it is. They literally, Americans are so geared towards black, white, good, bad narratives and this kind of liberalism that they unironically are just allergic to any kind of materialist understanding of the world. And they are so much more susceptible to anti-Semitic narratives, especially because anti-Semitic narratives are already in the ether, and they are aware of it, even if it's a kind of scary bigotry, a kind of edgy bigotry that ooh, you're not allowed to say. This is proof you don't pre-watch. Yeah, I thought the exact same thing, but he's essentially saying anyone being chosen automatically creates an environment where others are dehumanized.
Themselves. I don't think anybody can debate that. I don't think it's a...
Well, it's not the problem isn't that they're protecting themselves. The problem comes when you think that you're better than other people, and you think it's okay to lie to anybody that's not a Jew. You think it's okay to steal from people that are not a Jew. You have two sets of standards. The problem with that is it allows you to rationalize anything, right? And human beings are generally self-serving creatures.
And is that rooted in Judaism as a religion? Or is it rooted in ethno-nationalist, ethno-supremacist political ideologies? Right? The Jewish people aren't the only people who have come up with an ideology like this, Dan Bilzerian. The Jewish people are not the only ones who have come up with an ideology that says we are superior to you, therefore you're not even human and we can do whatever we want to you, and everyone else is dehumanized. Right? There's a very popular what was a very popular ideology in 1940s Germany, which had the same viewpoint and which saw the Jews as subhuman. And then the Zionists took that, and said, accepted the premise, that Jews cannot assimilate into Europe, and said, no, actually, we're the supreme ethnicity, or we're the supreme nationality, and we're going to conquer this place and push off the Palestinians, and they're the subhumans. Right? Any group, any nation can develop a supremacist ideology, an ethno-supremacist ideology. There are tons of white supremacists here in the United States who are pushing the same kind of talking points that Bilzerian is right now, when they're all just wannabe Netanyahus. Right? All that Nick Fuentes is saying is that, Israel or Zionism is Judaism. Look what the Jews are doing. They're, organizing and fighting for themselves. So we as white Christians should do the same. We should organize ourselves upon racial lines and fight for ourselves. All he wants is to be a Netanyahu. But rather than ruling over a Jewish ethno-state, he rules over a white ethno-state. The Nazi ideology, the Nick Fuentes white supremacist ideology, and the Zionist ideology are the same. It's just different groups saying we're the supremacist ones. But in reality, you're all retarded. I'm sorry to use that word. But there's no supreme group of people. Every group of people has dumbasses, and every group of people has geniuses. Whether you divide them by skin or hair or gender or whatever the hell. So you're all just ethno-supremacist wannabe Netanyahus when you push this ethno-supremacist ideology, and it's not rooted in the Talmud, right? It's rooted in colonialism and the thirst for power, and people who have the wealth and people who have the power in society, which is those who own the means of production, using this ethno-supremacist ideology, pushing white supremacist or Jewish supremacist or Aryan supremacist ideology in order to support their own material interests, which is what Zionism is. The reason why wealthy, Christians in the US support Zionism in Israel isn't because they believe in the freaking Talmud. Mike Pompeo doesn't support Israel because he believes in the Talmud. He supports them because he thinks Israel will protect U.S. economic interests and geopolitical interests in the Middle East, because they want an unsinkable air carrier in the Middle East, as Hassan said, who will protect U.S. multinational corporations and fire missiles at countries like Syria and Iran, who the U.S. doesn't like. It's not because of the Talmud. Mike Pompeo could care less about Jewish people or the Jewish religion. He's an evangelical Christian neoconservative.
So if your fundamental religious belief system allows you to operate in such a way that you believe there isn't consequences to stealing from other people, killing other people, kids that are under 9 years old.
The irony of this kind of argument is that it's still like fascist thinking. So you end up doing the exact same thing that you're claiming Israel is doing. Like, oh, they have like supremacist attitudes.
Good job, Hassan. Good job, Hassan. You got it. It's just two sides of the same coin. You end up becoming a wannabe Netanyahu. You end up becoming a wannabe ethno-supremacist, ethno-nationalist world leader. That's all Nick Fuentes is. He doesn't hate Netanyahu. He's jealous of Netanyahu. He would love to be Netanyahu for white American Christians and hate on all the black Americans, the brown Americans, the Asian Americans, all of our great American citizens and great American workers who aren't white. He would love to, ethnically cleanse them the same way Netanyahu is doing to the Palestinians. He only acts like Netanyahu's such a bad guy so he can build his following and so he can demonize the Jewish people. But in reality, people like Fuentes are distracting others from the truth and pushing them towards a nonsensical feelings-based ideology that prevents them from actually understanding the Zionist entity and the arms of colonialism that prop it up. Nobel Prizes became the biggest scam once Obama won it. Brother, I'm pretty sure Henry Kissinger won it in the 70s. Pretty sure Nobel Prizes have been a scam for a little bit longer than that. Let me see here. 1973, the Norwegian Nobel Committee held a meeting at which it decided to give the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize to Henry Kissinger and someone with the last name Tho for their role in negotiating the Paris Peace Accords. So as the Vietnam War was winding down, and as the U.S. or not winding down, because, once the U.S. realized they couldn't win, Kissinger just ordered them to bomb everything that moves. In Cambodia, he said anything that moves or flies, bomb it, I think he said. And then in Vietnam, they realized they weren't going to win, so they just tried to dump as much Agent Orange and napalm and do as much destruction as possible at this point. But as that was going on under Henry Kissinger's watch, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. And hilariously, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for the Paris Peace Accords, which were the official agreement for ending the war in Vietnam. And he was credited for restoring peace in Vietnam. So Henry Kissinger restored peace in Vietnam and won a Nobel Prize for it. Holy cow. If the Nobel Peace Prize wasn't a joke at that point, then I don't know what. Because that's about the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Those clowns gave Solzhenitsyn a prize. I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did. Norm Finkelstein outlined a Jewish supremacist billionaire class, just saying. Yeah, like a Zionist billionaire class, basically. And he shows how even within the Jewish community, it wasn't the working class Jews at the time who were, pushing Zionism or coming up with Zionism. It was the socioeconomic elites, those who owned capital, who invented this ideology and pushed it on everybody else. Norm-based, yes. Very based. Gosh, there's freaking 2 flies around my computer that have been bugging me, and I haven't been able to finish them off yet. Might have got one of them just there. My ADD is not enjoying those flies. But there was a lot of support for Zionism. Yeah, they were very successful at manipulating the Jewish religion, using it to push Zionism. And they were even more successful in the US using the Holocaust to push for Zionism. That's what Finkelstein's The Holocaust Industry is about. And the most shocking thing about that book that blew my mind was in the 1950s, the vast majority of Americans had no idea about the Holocaust. No idea it had happened. And it was, it had happened a decade or 2 decades earlier. Jewish people were being exterminated in Germany, and we fought this world war against Germany. But people didn't even know the Holocaust happened. They just thought it was a war against Hitler because he was trying to take over Europe. But nowadays, 100% of Americans know the Holocaust happened. It's a fixture in American schools. There's thousands of Holocaust museums, and this is because of Zionism, because the Zionists realized that they could use the very real atrocities inflicted upon Jewish people in the Holocaust in order to justify inflicting very real atrocities on the Palestinians. So millions and millions of dollars were spent creating Holocaust museums and pushing for Holocaust education in schools, which of course seems noble, right? Yeah, everyone should learn about the Holocaust and how horrible it was and our country's role in bringing it to an end. We should be proud of that. But it was always tied to Israel, right? The Holocaust happened, therefore Israel was created, so the Jewish people have a homeland. And, ignore everything that's happening to the Palestinians, because look how many atrocities were inflicted upon the Jews. So that's, and Finkelstein makes a very powerful point. A decade before the Holocaust happened, King Leopold of Belgium massacred 10 million black Congolese people in the Congo when they weren't mining rubber fast enough. I mean, and of course there were over 10 million people killed in the Holocaust. About 5.1 to 6 million Jewish people were exterminated, but also you have, disabled people, all of the communists, political dissidents, Romani people. But anyways, a similar amount of people were killed by a European leader in Belgium just 10 years earlier, or, maybe 20, 30 years earlier. Why don't we know about that? Well, it's because there was no, group of Congolese people using the unaliving of 10 million Congolese people to justify colonizing somewhere else, right? There was no group of wealthy people pushing education about the genocide of the Congolese in order to justify colonialism somewhere else. That is what Zionists used the Holocaust for. So that's why we know so much about the Holocaust comparatively to other genocides or compared to other mass atrocities. It was because Zionists recognized that they could use it to justify colonization. Now, that doesn't mean the Holocaust was good. That doesn't mean the Holocaust was fake. The Holocaust happened. It was horrific, and Jewish people were targeted and exterminated en masse. But Zionists used that very real atrocity to justify 70 plus years of very similar atrocities on the people of Palestine. So they basically became the Nazis that they were oppressed by. $10 to 25 million Soviets died fighting the Nazis. Yep. Yes, they did. It was a war won by the Soviets. Who knew genocides were buy one, get one free? They are kind of buy one, get one free, because then you turn the other side against you. or you push the other side into the same kind of atrocities. Also, Europeans didn't see Africans as human back in the 1920s. That is also true. And anti-Semitism was rampant, not just in Germany, but everywhere. And also the Slavs and the Romani people. The Romani people's history is very similar to the Jewish people's history. I've heard people say that, should the Romani people be allowed to take over Iraq and ethnically cleanse the people of Iraq and found a Romani state? Because they've been targeted very similar to, and this is, the word gypsy is actually like a derogative like slur towards Romani people, but the idea is that you're just wandering around, we all know what a gypsy is, someone who just wanders around without a home, similar to the character archetype of the wandering Jew that I was talking about earlier. So that's been the history of the Romani people forever, wandering around Europe without a home, and they've faced discrimination, they've faced ethnic cleansing, they've faced suppression. There are still extremely bigoted attitudes towards those kind of people today. I have a friend who's actually a Romani Jew, so he's about as oppressed as you can get when it comes to Europe. But yeah, should the Romani people be allowed to take over Libya and ethnically cleanse their people and form a Romani state because they were oppressed in the past? Probably not. Nobody knows how many Romanis lived in Europe because of how many death camps they did. Yeah, it's really quite insane. And Tyson Fury, the former boxing heavyweight champion of the world, is Romani. His nickname is the Gypsy King. Gypsy comes from the word Egyptus. What does that mean? Egyptus ruled Arabia and conquered nearby country ruled by people called Melampides called it Egypt. So it was early Egypt, or a name for the early Egyptians. Along the Nile. I saw a picture the other day. I'll try and bring it up. It was population density in Africa. It was so, I thought Egypt was so interesting. Because you just see how their society was completely built along the Nile. Here it is. So here's, obviously, this is the Sahara Desert. Not many people here. Tons of people in West Africa. AFRICOM is very involved there. The U.S. is often talking about what's going on in West Africa. Lots of people in Southeast Africa. These regions here are pretty arid, not a ton of people, but then lots of people up here by the Mediterranean, in the closest area to Europe. But then look at, what the heck? Why is my fire alarm going off? That was odd. 1 second. Let me just double check there's no fire. All right. That was extremely strange. I don't know if that was one of my neighbors or the CIA or what we got going on here, but I was scared. I thought I was going to walk outside and there was going to be an actual fire. But there's nothing going on, not a peep. Feds went from mics to smoke detectors. I guess so. But here's Africa, and look at Egypt, is what I wanted to say. You can see the whole society was built right along the Nile. And that's why they were able to have people so deep into the Sahara Desert. And obviously Israel, Palestine's right up here. And Egypt also controls this area, which is part of Asia, which is the desert, the Sinai Desert. But during from like 1948 till like the 1970s, with I can't remember the guy who took over in Egypt, who was like a puppet of the West, but especially under Nasser, Egypt was the main protagonist fighting against Israel. Like all of the Arab-Israeli wars at that time were mainly Nasser versus Israel wars, Egypt versus Israel wars, and they were fighting on behalf of the Palestinians who had, nothing, and fighting on behalf of the Arab people. And it's very interesting to go back and read about what Egypt was doing back then, and then you think about all of the Arab countries today who are just, working with Israel and cowering, other than, a handful of countries like Syria, and obviously Hezbollah controls all these areas in Lebanon and are much, 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 much more brave and much more based than the Lebanese government. But, of course, you have all these Arab governments now who are just complete sellouts to Israel and sell out their own people in Palestine. And it's crazy to think that we used to have Nasser, this leader who was like, no, I'm going to fight back. And they gave Israel a bloody nose in the early 70s, which is why Israel had to give a lot of land back at that time. The funny thing about the Egyptian perspective of the Exodus is that the Egyptians say they kicked out the Israelites for being lepers and accused their god of being the evil Egyptian god Set. Huh. Interesting. The Israelites are being lepers. Huh. Interesting. I was looking into leprosy the other day because why was I doing that? Why was I looking into leprosy? Oh, I was researching the Crusades. Yeah, I was reading about the Crusades and King Baldwin, the Leper King, who was one of the Crusade leaders who had leprosy. And he's in the movie Kingdom of Heaven, which is about the Crusades. He wears a mask, but he didn't wear a mask in real life. He would just let everyone see his leprosy. It's kind of crazy. The Crusades were terrible, and shouldn't have happened, but and they're an example of how any religion can be twisted and used to justify imperialism and colonialism. But that being said, the story of a king who had leprosy, especially at that time when people were so like judgmental and everything was such a rigid hierarchy, it's kind of a badass story that you were able to lead your people even though you had a terminal illness since you were a kid that made your body completely deformed and like as hideous as a human body can be. No offense if anyone in the chat has leprosy right now, but it's pretty brutal what it does to your face and your extremities. He fought too. He would fight in wars. He would ride on his horse and he would fight, even though he couldn't like feel his hands because he had leprosy. Like, okay, no respect for the Crusades, but I give you respect for that. And yeah, I don't know. I went down a rabbit hole the other day. Then I was watching all these videos from like Catholic people who say that the Crusades were good. They give like an alternative perspective on the Crusades, but a lot of the people who say that seem like Nazis. So like like actual Nazis. There was a bit of a connection between the Catholic Church and Nazism and Nazi ideology. So, yeah, one of the only Nazis I've ever met in real life was a hardcore Catholic. That's anecdotal, but Norton was awesome in that. Yeah, Ben Norton's a great freaking actor. Not Ben Norton. Edward Norton. I said Ben Norton. Ben Norton's a geopolitical commentator. Edward Norton, who's got my name. That's funny that I called it Ben Norton. Michael Hudson did good research on the Crusades, which is a part of the nascent church's ban on biblical debt. Oh, great reframing of the narrative. Interesting. Now I got to read that. I need to dig into Michael Hudson. I got to finish volume 3. That inspired me. I'm going to read volume 3 after this. After I end this stream, hopefully my brain doesn't blow up and give me another freaking migraine. Ben Norton can shred on the guitar. He can. He can. I don't agree with Ben Norton on everything. I'm pretty sure that he thinks I'm a reactionary fascist or something. But the man's good at guitar, and I've seen Tankies making fun of his music, which, you know, it's kind of weird, like avant-garde, artsy style over substance music. But the man can play guitar; he can shred. Hudson is great, yes. Hudson and his history books changed the whole game of parts of history for me, at least. Yeah, definitely. Any Marxist analysis will do that. Like, that's why we say W.E.B. Du Bois is so big, right? Because nobody before Du Bois had provided a Marxist class analysis of the American Civil War. That's why he's so vital to understand, because that's our history, right? That is so important for us as Americans to understand. That's a history of class struggle in our country. And we've been taught about the Civil War since we were little. We've been taught about this guy, Abe Lincoln, and the Union Army and the Confederacy. So we have an understanding of it already in our brains on the surface, at a surface level. So if you dive deep into a Marxist analysis, like in Black Reconstruction, or even my little essay on how Southern slavery in the American South helped to prop up capitalism in the American North and in Europe, once you read that class analysis of this event that we already know about, it's like mind-blowing. You see it in a whole new way. Like, oh, of course the Southern slave owners were brought into a class conflict with the slaves and the white workers and the white industrialists in the North. Did I get it? Son of a... I'm so sick of these flies. Yes. I don't remember what I was saying before that. Here's this Michael Hudson piece that people were talking about. If anyone's interested, I think this is the piece we were talking about. The Arc of Time, Pro-Creditor History, Origins of Debt. Hudson reveals how financial oligarchies in Greece and Rome shaped our world. Maybe this is it. I don't know. Oh, this is an interview, though. Yeah, it looks like he talks about the Christians. I'm sure he talks about the Crusades in here. I'll put the link for people in the chat in case anyone wants to check that out. Religion is another word for cult. Spirituality is a different story. Is it another word for cult, or is it another word for community? Community under capitalism. I don't know. I think it gives people a lot of community and a lot of connection in a society that deprives them of that. And it gives them a larger purpose and a larger focus, and it's just a way to cope with death. Death is scary. Religion helps people cope with death. I don't think it'll ever go away. I think under socialism, religion will persist. And I think it'll be allowed to persist in a more pure form, because you won't have economic coercion. You won't have a ruling class that needs to use religion to prop itself up and keep people in their place the way that you do now. So religion can just be what it is. It can just exist as it is. You won't have Joel Osteen running his mega church in Texas, preaching the prosperity gospel, saying, guess what, folks? If you donate money to my church, you're sowing the seeds of your future riches. You donate money to me now, and God will make you rich in the future. Because guess what? Jesus loves capitalism. I'm Joel Osteen. I think under socialism, shit like that can go away. But I think religion will persist, and I think people will still have their religious communities and beliefs. I get your point, Eddie. Yeah. I get your point too, of course, Sulamoon. I of course get your point that religion is basically a cult. Of course. Of course. I was raised in the evangelical Christian church. Of course I understand exactly what you're saying and have agreement with it on various levels. But I also understand people in that church pretty well. And I know that they're not all bad people. And I know that the church and their church family, that church community that they have, I know that sure means a lot to them. And I know that keeps them going at times when they're depressed or suicidal or just dealing with alienation and isolation that we all deal with under capitalism. So it really is the opium of the masses. I was raised evangelical too, LOL. Shit was whack as hell. They just focus on like heaven and hell so much. It's all about like, no matter what you do, if you believe the verse John 3:16, then you're going to heaven. For God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life or everlasting life. So basically, you can do whatever you want in life, but as long as you believe this verse, as long as you believe that Jesus died on the cross for our sins and you accept him as your savior, then you can go to heaven. So if that's the main focus of your religion, or sort of the main premise of your religion, it turns into like every day at church, it was like heaven or hell, heaven or hell. Which one are you going to? How strong is your faith? Is your faith strong enough? Are you questioning your faith? Are you questioning whether God exists? Well, then you're going to hell. And you listen to this stuff as a kid, and I remember distinctly having a dream as a kid where God was taking me up to heaven. I like died, and God was bringing me up to heaven, and Satan came and grabbed me by my leg and pulled me back to hell, because my faith wasn't strong enough, because I was, I was questioning my faith in my head as a kid. Well, do I really believe this stuff or not? And I had this dream that the devil pulled me to hell. And it was one of those dreams where you feel like you're falling and you wake up, like jolt up. So, definitely have criticisms of that religion. But again, it was a good source of community for me. It did instill me with good values about caring for other people. My parents were very much the kind of Christians who would actually read the Bible and actually form their own ideas about the theology, that the basis of the religion, rather than just being told everything by a pastor. And so it was actually, like a cornerstone of who they were as people, this religious system, or their religious beliefs. And also it gave me some skills, like evangelicals are all about evangelizing people, right? Go tell people the good word. We have the good word of God, so why would you keep it? Go tell it on the mountain. That's a famous song in the evangelical Christian tradition. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Take the good word of God and spread it with people. And I kind of do that with Marxism, right? I've kind of taken that evangelical attitude of go tell it on the mountain and done it with Marxism, because like for me, it wasn't enough to just study Marx. I was like, holy shit, more people need to know about this. More people need to know that Marxism isn't what we've been told that it is, and that it can actually help us understand the system and all our problems today. I need to tell them. I need to make a TikTok account. And I feel like sometimes people, especially academics, they just read Marxism in their cave and they don't share it with anyone. They don't try to educate anyone. And I do feel like that idea of I got to tell people about this was kind of instilled in me by the evangelical church. And I've told Carlos that before. They also believe in spiritual warfare, and that guides the culture war campaigns. Very true. Very true. There's a book that an evangelical gave me a while back, called This Present Darkness, which is a book about spiritual warfare. And it's basically, there's like a guy who's like works for a newspaper company or something, and he's going through his everyday life, like just, living life. And as he's going through his everyday life, there are like angels fighting with demons around him, and they're having this spiritual warfare. And when he makes good decisions in life, the angels start to win. And when he makes bad decisions, the demons start to win. And it's a question of, who's in control, or are your actions affecting the spiritual warfare, or the spiritual warfare affecting your actions? But either way, it's a very famous book, This Present Darkness, very famous with evangelicals. Yeah, and it's all about how your actions are connected to this invisible spiritual war. So a lot of people who are fighting this culture war battles as if they're the only things that matter, focusing on the culture war rather than class struggle, and claiming that liberals are communists and that that wokeism is being pushed on us by communists. A lot of those people are evangelicals who feel that they're fighting the spiritual war, who read This Present Darkness as a kid, and now they think they're an angel, fighting against the evil communist spirit demons. They also, this is just I'm just gonna vent right now about my religious upbringing since we're talking about it. There's also way too much focus in the church on like sex, right? They're so focused on what gay people are doing, and what the kids are doing and premarital sex, and like the Bible focuses on all this stuff. And I always thought this, I'm like, the Bible focuses on like feeding people and helping the poor and helping the sick and not being egotistical and helping those who are less fortunate and putting the community above ourselves. Like these are the principles of Jesus. And it very rarely talks about like sexual stuff, but that's like all the church wants to talk about is like, are you having sex? And I remember when I went to college, like this guy in the church who was an elder, who was like in the group that ran the church, who like gave me this big long talk about how I'm going to be tempted to have premarital sex, but I need to fight those temptations and how it's a spiritual battle. And that's the number one thing that I need to fight. And even at the time as a 19-year-old, it was so ridiculous to me. I'm like, here I am at this place where I was raised, at this place where I grew up, this church. I'm about to go take on the world. I'm about to leave my hometown and go try to do something new. And the last piece of advice this guy has for me isn't to serve other people, isn't to, try to live like Jesus lived, or to put the community above myself, or to put my ego aside. It's don't have premarital sex. Make sure that you do not get intimate with a woman before you make your marriage vows. And I'm just like, I don't feel like that's the most important thing in the world, right? I believe in monogamy and stuff, but I feel like there are more important things than premarital sex or what gay people are doing. Damn, that's depressing. Yeah, and I won't get into that guy's life, but it's more depressing if you learn his story too. He had some things going on behind the scenes. That make me laugh now that I look back at them. Procreate. Whoa, a $20 super sticker from Kate HW. Thank you so much, Kate. People's Funded Institute here at Midwestern Marx. All of our funding that we put towards advancing the class struggle and educating and putting classes together and putting out content and organizing with the American Communist Party, all of that comes from viewer donations from people like you, people who are on patreon.com/Midwestern Marx, people who are Midwestern Marx YouTube members like Kate, which is what that little circle thing means there, that she's a YouTube member, which means she gets access to Carlos's book, The Purity Fetish, and a bunch of other things, some exclusive content. But yeah, if you want to support us, super stickers, become a member, patreon.com/Midwestern Marx. Thank you so much, Kate, for the $20. That's huge. Yeah, really, 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 really appreciate that. Was he a hypocrite? He wasn't a hypocrite, but he might have been burned by women in his life in the past, which turned him into a misogynist and turned him into someone who is obsessed with sex and thinking about sex all the time, if that makes sense. Lenin was against promiscuity. He said that being too sex obsessed would waste one's energy. Absolutely. 100% true. 100% true. It's a natural part of life. You shouldn't be ashamed of it. But some people, it's all they want to talk about. It's like, brother, you're like me when I was in middle school. You're like me when I hit puberty. Talk about something else sometimes. All right. Anything else people want to talk about? Any other questions or any other super chat questions people want to send, or topics or short videos that they need to hear my opinion on? If not, I'll probably wrap up the stream. We've been going for 2.5 hours, which is pretty dang great. I still have some stuff that I was hoping to get done today. But yeah, it was a great stream. Make sure to subscribe. Follow me at Edward M. Liger on TikTok. Follow me at Ed B. Liger Smith on X. Follow us on, or like us on Facebook at Midwestern Marx, because we don't have any Facebook followers at all, pretty much. Follow my second TikTok account at Ed B. Liger. Follow our Instagram account, Midwestern Marx. Follow us on Rumble. Is it possible to affirm Marxist economic and social principles without agreeing with Marx's atheistic philosophy? 100%, 120%. And I'm sure you agree with that as the Muslim Marxist. I mean, that's what Nicaragua has proved that beyond a shadow of a doubt. There were 3 factions in the 90s of the Sandinistas. So for those who don't know, the Sandinistas had their revolution. The U.S. came in and backed all these right-wing forces. The Sandinistas eventually lost election to the U.S.-backed forces. And then they came back like 6 or 8 years later and won election and regained control of the country. So during that time when they were out of power, there were 3 factions of the Sandinistas saying, you know, this is the direction that we should go now. This is where we should, you know, this is how we should pick up the pieces and move forward. And the faction that won out and ended up regaining power was the Christian Socialist faction, the liberation theology faction, the faction that said we are going to be a Christian socialist country. And that was very popular with the people and was able to win the people away from the reactionaries. And Nicaragua has been socialist ever since. So not only is it possible, but in some cases it's necessary. Thank you. Thank you. All right, y'all. I'm going to call it a day then. Thank you so much for hanging out. This was such a fun stream. Had a blast today with you all. We will be back. Carlos will be back next week. I'm hoping that me and him can do a stream together either tomorrow or sometime next week. Obviously, for the next 3 weeks, I'm going to be training hard for the World Team Trials, which are going to be in Omaha, Nebraska. If anyone wants to come watch. September 14th and 15th. So I had to think of the month. But if I seem extra tired or like I'm missing an action in the coming weeks, that's where I'm at, training my ass off, getting ready to kick some butt. So looking forward to that, representing the ACP at a wrestling tournament. But other than that, I think that's all I have. So I will see you guys on the next stream. Solidarity, patreon.com/MidwesternMarx. Join the ACP. Much love.
Stand for victims of oppression, for the fear your mind. Don't cling so hard to your possession, for you have nothing if you have no right. Let racist ignorance be for respect makes the empire fall. Freedom is merely privilege, it stands unless enjoyed by one and all. So come brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The international law unites the world in song. So comrades, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the race. And no one knows to divide us. Walls of hatred, no walls of stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together, we'll die alone. In our world, poison by exploitation. Those who have taken, now they must give. And then the nations, but one earth, on which to live. So come brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The international law unites the world in song. So comrades, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. And so begins the fight in the streets and in the field. We stand for them forever. We defy their guns and shields. When we fight their oppression, they fight by life and life. For those from above. So come brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The international unites the world in war. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and day. The international unites the